The afternoon sun sliced through the glass atrium of Lenox Square Mall at precisely 2:15 p.m., catching thousands of silver ornaments suspended from the vaulted ceiling like a frozen constellation. The light transformed the shopping center into a cathedral of commerce and holiday cheer, every surface gleaming with the kind of manufactured magic that defined the season. Holiday music drifted through the air from hidden speakers, blending with the hum of conversation, the rustle of shopping bags, and the rhythmic scrape of skate blades on ice that echoed through the vast space with hypnotic regularity. Lieutenant Sarah Collins moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her Atlanta PD uniform drawing occasional glances from shoppers loaded with bags bearing the logos of high-end retailers. The weight of her duty belt felt familiar against her hips, the radio clipped to her shoulder, a constant connection to the wider world of law enforcement beyond this bubble of holiday excess. Beside her, K-9 Max kept perfect pace, his lean body weaving through the flow of people without hesitation. The Belgian Malinois carried himself with quiet authority, amber eyes scanning the environment with the methodical attention that had made him legendary in the K-9 unit. His dark coat gleamed under the atrium lights, muscles moving with fluid precision beneath the surface. The black tactical harness he wore marked him as a working dog, not a pet, and people instinctively gave him space as he moved through the crowd. The mall had transformed for the season into something that resembled a winter wonderland, despite Atlanta's temperate December climate. Every surface gleamed with festive decoration, from the towering Christmas tree near the north entrance, easily 40 feet tall and covered in thousands of twinkling lights, to the garlands wrapped around every column and draped across every storefront entrance. Mechanical reindeer moved their heads in slow, repetitive motions near the food court. Nutcracker soldiers stood guard at the escalators. The entire complex had been converted into a stage set for the holidays, designed to encourage spending and create memories in equal measure. But the centerpiece was new this year, and it was the reason Sarah had been drawn to this particular patrol route. A full-size ice skating rink had been installed in the central atrium, a feat of engineering that required a complete refrigeration system to maintain frozen water in a climate where afternoon temperatures still regularly hit the low 60s. The rink was surrounded by cafe tables where adults sipped hot chocolate and watched skaters glide across the translucent surface. Some were skilled, executing graceful turns and backward skating. Others clung to the barriers, laughing as they struggled to maintain balance. The scene was cheerful and bright, exactly the kind of family-friendly atmosphere the mall management had been hoping to create. The rink had been open for 2 weeks, drawing crowds every afternoon and evening since its grand opening. Security had requested additional patrols after reports of theft near the holiday displays, particularly expensive items being taken from unlocked cars in the parking structure, and Sarah had volunteered for the assignment. It was routine work, a break from the intensity of narcotic sweeps and warrant executions that filled most of her schedule. The K-9 unit usually focused on more serious crimes, but December always brought a shift in priorities, as the department tried to maintain a visible presence during the shopping season. Sarah did not mind. The mall was climate-controlled, the work was easy, and it gave Max a chance to work in a low-stress environment where his presence alone deterred most would-be criminals. They had been making circuits of the shopping center for just over an hour, moving from level to level, checking blind spots and dark corners when Max stopped. Sarah took 3 more steps before she realized her partner was no longer beside her. The sudden absence of his presence was like a physical thing, a breaking of the rhythm they had maintained for 7 years together. She turned back to find him frozen at the edge of the rink barrier, his entire body locked in rigid attention. His gaze was fixed on the ice with an intensity that sent immediate alarm bells ringing in Sarah's mind. This was not his usual alertness, not the way he reacted to suspicious individuals or interesting scents. His muscles were taut beneath his dark coat, every line of his body screaming tension. His breathing had changed, becoming rapid and shallow, nostrils flaring as he processed something Sarah could not detect. She moved back to his side quickly, crouching beside him to get down to his level. The skaters continued their lazy circles across the ice, unaware of the K-9's sudden fixation. A man in his 20s executed a clumsy spin and nearly fell, catching himself at the last second and laughing. A woman in a red jacket skated backward with practiced ease, her movements smooth and confident. The scene was completely ordinary, festive, and harmless. Sarah followed Max's line of sight, but saw nothing unusual, just the smooth expanse of artificial ice reflecting the overhead lights and decorations. The surface showed the crisscrossing patterns left by dozens of blades, a chaotic map of movement and momentum. She placed a hand on Max's shoulder, feeling the tension vibrating through his frame like an electrical current. "Max, what is it?" Her voice was low, meant only for him, carrying the quiet concern of someone who had learned to read every nuance of her partner's behavior. The Malinois did not move. His breathing remained controlled but rapid, and she could see the slight tremor in his front legs as he fought between training and instinct. Sarah had seen Max alert on hidden suspects, on concealed drugs, on explosives that would have killed dozens if not detected. She had seen him track through miles of wilderness and locate missing persons when every other method had failed. But she had never seen him react quite like this. There was something primal in his response, something that went beyond the calculated reactions of training. This was pure instinct, the kind that came from millions of years of evolution, from ancestors who had survived by trusting their senses over their logic. She scanned the rink more carefully, this time looking for anything out of the ordinary. The ice appeared normal on first glance. A uniform sheet of frozen water maintained by the complex refrigeration system installed beneath the temporary platform. But as she studied it more intently, paying attention to variations in color and clarity, she noticed something. Near the center of the rink, in a roughly circular area, perhaps 10 feet in diameter, the ice looked different, thicker somehow, with a faint haziness that could have been condensation or imperfections in the freezing process. The light passing through that section had a different quality, slightly diffused, as if the ice was denser there than in the surrounding areas. Most people would not have noticed it. Sarah herself might not have noticed if Max had not drawn her attention to this exact spot. She stood slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her radio. 7 years of partnership had taught her to trust Max's instincts absolutely. He had never been wrong, not once. When he alerted, there was always a reason, even if it took hours or days to discover what that reason was. If he sensed something wrong here, something that made every instinct in his body scream for attention, then something was definitively wrong. The logical part of Sarah's mind was already running through possibilities. Structural damage to the platform? Some kind of chemical leak from the refrigeration system? An object embedded in the ice during installation? None of the explanations felt right, but she could not identify what was truly concerning Max. She keyed her radio, speaking clearly and calmly despite the anxiety building in her chest. "Collins to mall security. I need the ice rink cleared immediately. Possible safety concern." The response crackled back after a brief pause. "Copy that, Lieutenant Collins. Can you specify the nature of the concern?" "K-9 alert. Unknown threat. Just clear it." Sarah kept her eyes on Max, who had not moved an inch. The Malinois remained locked in place, as if he was physically unable to turn away from whatever he sensed beneath that ice. Within minutes, a security supervisor appeared from the mall's administrative office, moving quickly across the polished floor. He was a thin man in his 50s, with graying hair cut short, and a name tag reading Marcus Walsh, Director of Security. He looked skeptical but professional as he approached the rink barrier, his eyes moving between Sarah, Max, and the ice rink that represented a significant investment for the mall. "Lieutenant Collins, I understand you've requested an evacuation of the rink. I'm going to need more specifics before we take that action. This is peak shopping hours, and the rink is one of our major attractions this season." Sarah turned to face him, her expression leaving no room for debate. "My K-9 has detected something. I need everyone off the ice until we determine what it is. This is not a request." Walsh glanced at Max, then at the skaters making their leisurely circuits. There were perhaps 20 people on the ice at the moment, ranging in age from late teens to 60s, all seeming to enjoy themselves thoroughly. "Ma'am, with all respect to you and your dog, I don't see anything wrong here. The rink has been operating safely for 2 weeks. We have regular maintenance checks. The dog might just be reacting to the cold, or the movement, or the sound of the refrigeration equipment." Max does not react to cold, movement, or mechanical sounds. Sarah's tone was flat and hard, the voice of someone who had given orders in far more dangerous situations than a shopping mall ice rink. "He is trained to detect human scent, explosives, and narcotics. If he's alerting, there is a reason. Now you can clear the rink voluntarily, or I can call in backup and we can clear it officially. Your choice, but either way, everyone gets off that ice in the next 5 minutes. The authority in her voice, combined with the obvious intensity of Max's reaction, finally convinced Walsh. He nodded reluctantly, pulling his own radio from his belt. "All security personnel, this is Walsh. Initiate Protocol 7. Clear the ice rink immediately. Treat it as a maintenance issue. Keep it calm. No need to alarm anyone." The process took longer than 5 minutes, closer to 15, as security personnel moved onto the ice and began politely ushering skaters toward the exits. Some adults protested the interruption, arguing that they had paid for their session and demanding refunds. Others seemed confused but cooperative, gathering their belongings from the cafe tables and moving back toward the skate rental area. A woman in her 30s wearing designer athletic wear was particularly vocal in her complaints, insisting that she came to the mall specifically for the skating and that this was completely unacceptable. Walsh handled her personally, speaking in low, apologetic tones while firmly guiding her away from the rink. Eventually, the surface stood empty, the ice unmarred except for the crisscrossing trails left by dozens of blades over the course of the afternoon. The holiday music continued to play from the overhead speakers, oddly cheerful against the growing tension that had settled over the central atrium. Sarah stepped up to the barrier, studying the ice with greater focus now that she could examine it without distraction. Max moved with her, his attention never wavering from that spot near the center of the rink. The difference in the ice was more visible now, subtle but definitely present. The clarity was off, as if this section had been frozen under different conditions than the rest. She pulled out her phone and took several photographs, documenting the discoloration and the haziness that marked the area. The ice there looked thicker than the surrounding surface, perhaps an inch or two deeper, which made no sense if the entire rink had been constructed in uniform layers. Walsh returned with another man, this one younger, maybe 30, wearing a maintenance uniform with the mall's logo embroidered on the chest. His name tag identified him as Danny Chen, and he carried a tablet computer that displayed what looked like technical specifications and diagrams. "This is our facilities manager," Walsh explained. "He oversaw the entire rink installation project. Danny, Lieutenant Collins has some concerns about the ice." Chen looked nervous, his eyes darting between Sarah, Max, and the ice rink that represented months of planning and significant budget allocation. "Is there a problem, officer? I mean, Lieutenant?" "How thick is the ice supposed to be?" Sarah asked, keeping her tone neutral and professional. 4 inches. That's the standard specification for a temporary rink of this size. Chen pulled up a screen on his tablet, showing detailed engineering drawings. We contracted with Iceworks Entertainment out of Jacksonville. They're one of the premier temporary ice rink installers in the Southeast. They handle all the technical aspects, from the refrigeration system to the actual ice construction. The whole thing took 3 weeks to build, working mostly overnight to avoid disrupting mall operations. When was the last time someone inspected the underside of the platform? Sarah studied the technical drawings, noting the complex arrangement of cooling pipes and support structures beneath the ice. Underside? Chen looked confused, swiping through screens on his tablet. The platform is sealed. There's no regular access underneath except through the maintenance hatch for the refrigeration equipment, and that stays locked unless we're performing specific maintenance. The only people with keys are myself, Mr. Walsh, and a few senior facilities staff. Sarah felt a cold certainty settling in her chest. The kind of intuition that came from years of investigating crime scenes and following evidence to dark conclusions. Open the maintenance hatch. I need to see underneath. Chen and Walsh exchanged glances that spoke of shared concern about overreaction and potential disruption to mall operations. Walsh spoke first, his tone carefully measured. Lieutenant, I really think you might be overreacting to whatever the dog is sensing. This is a multi-$100,000 installation. We can't just start taking it apart because of a K-9 alert. The ice is probably just thicker in that spot due to the way the water froze. Temperature variations, humidity, any number of factors could cause that. Max is not just a K-9. He's a trained police K-9 with 7 years of active service and a record of never giving a false alert. Sarah's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. He is trained to detect human scent, explosive materials, and controlled substances, not refrigerant or mechanical systems. If he's alerting on that ice, it's because there's something under there that should not be. Now you can open that maintenance hatch voluntarily, or I can get a warrant and we can do this officially with crime scene technicians and enough police presence to shut down your entire atrium for days. Your choice. The threat of that level of disruption, combined with the absolute certainty in Sarah's voice, finally broke through Walsh's resistance. He nodded slowly, resignation settling across his features. All right, Danny, open the hatch. Let's see what's down there. Chen led them around the edge of the rink to a service door concealed behind a large festive banner showing Santa's sleigh and reindeer. He pulled a keycard from his pocket and swiped it through the reader mounted next to the door. The lock clicked open with an electronic beep. The door itself was heavy steel, clearly designed for security rather than aesthetics, and it took Chen some effort to pull it open. Beyond was a narrow stairway that descended into darkness, lit only by dim safety lighting at floor level. The temperature dropped noticeably as cold air flowed up from below, carrying with it the sharp chemical smell of industrial refrigerant and the metallic tang of extensive machinery. Sarah pulled a flashlight from her duty belt and activated it, the LED beam cutting through the shadows. Max pressed against her leg, still tense but now eager to investigate. "Stay behind me," Sarah instructed Walsh and Chen. "If there's a safety issue down there, I want to assess it before anyone else is exposed." She descended the stairs carefully, Max at her side, the Malinois' claws clicking softly on the metal treads. The space beneath the ice rink was larger than she had expected, a chamber perhaps 15 feet high and extending across the entire area of the rink above. The underside of the ice rink platform formed the ceiling, a complex arrangement of metal framework, insulation, and the thick layer of ice itself. Cooling units lined the walls, humming with mechanical precision, their compressors and fans creating a constant background noise that made conversation difficult. Pipes snaked across every surface, carrying coolant in endless circulation to maintain the frozen surface above. The air smelled of metal, chemical refrigerant, and cold. It was the kind of space that was never meant to be occupied for long, built purely for function with no concern for comfort or aesthetics. Chen pointed to the ceiling of the chamber, where a large reinforced viewing panel had been installed. This is how we monitor ice thickness and cooling distribution without having to drain and access the surface directly. The panel lets us see through to check for any issues with the ice formation. Sarah moved to the viewing panel and looked up through it. The ice was translucent from below, allowing light to filter through from the brightly lit atrium above. The overhead decorations and lights created shifting patterns as they passed through the frozen water, giving the entire chamber an ethereal, underwater quality. But near the center of the viewing panel, directly aligned with the spot where Max had alerted, there was a distortion in the ice. Something dark and solid that interrupted the flow of light. From this angle, with her flashlight beam angled upward, Sarah could see it clearly. It was not a flaw in the ice. It was not a piece of equipment or structural support. The shape was too organic, too irregular, and as her eyes adjusted to the interplay of light and shadow, the form resolved into something that made her breath catch in her throat. Arms spread slightly, legs extended, head tilted back at an unnatural angle. A human form, suspended in the ice like a fossil trapped in amber. The face was obscured by frost and the thickness of the frozen water, but there was no mistaking what she was looking at. "Jesus Christ!" Walsh's voice came from behind her, barely above a whisper. He had followed her down despite her warning, and now he stood frozen in horror, staring up at the viewing panel. Chen made a choking sound and staggered backward, one hand pressed to his mouth. "That's impossible. That can't be real. That can't be there. We inspected everything. We checked every layer, every single layer." His voice was rising, panic threading through each word. Sarah was already on her radio, her training overriding the shock and revulsion of the discovery. Her voice was calm, professional, the tone of someone who had seen terrible things before and knew how to function through them. "Dispatch. This is Lieutenant Sarah Collins. Badge number 3279. I'm at Lenox Square Mall, Central Atrium Ice Rink. I have a code 10. Repeat, code 10. I need homicide, medical examiner's office, and crime scene unit. Priority response." The dispatcher's voice came back immediately, recognizing the code for a dead body. "Copy that, Lieutenant Collins. All units en route. Can you confirm status and condition of the victim?" Sarah looked up at the frozen figure, at the way the ice held it in perfect stasis, preserved in the moment of death. Deceased. Cause unknown. Time unknown. Body is fully encased in approximately 8 inches of ice. This is a crime scene. I need this location locked down immediately, within 30 minutes. The central atrium of Lenox Square Mall had been transformed from a festive shopping destination into an active crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the entire ice rink and a 50-foot perimeter around it. Uniformed officers established a secure perimeter, keeping curious shoppers and concerned store managers at bay. The holiday music had been silenced at Sarah's request, leaving only the constant hum of voices, footsteps, and the mechanical sounds of the mall's environmental systems. Detective Marcus Rivera arrived with the homicide unit, his weathered face showing no surprise at finding Sarah Collins at the center of yet another major case. Rivera was in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much darkness in the world. He and Sarah had worked together on dozens of cases over the years, developing a professional respect and an easy working relationship built on mutual competence. "Collins," he greeted her with a slight nod as he ducked under the crime scene tape. "Your dog again?" Max found him. Sarah stood beside the service entrance to the platform chamber, watching as crime scene technicians began setting up equipment. Refused to move past the Rink. I would have walked right by without him. Rivera studied Max, who sat calmly beside Sarah now that the immediate alert was over. The Malinois looked back at the detective with that unreadable K-9 expression that could have meant anything or nothing. That dog has better instincts than half my unit. What are we looking at? Sarah led him down into the chamber, where additional lighting had been set up to illuminate the viewing panel. Rivera stood beneath the ice, looking up at the frozen figure, and let out a long, slow breath. Well, that's something you don't see every day. How long before we can get to the body? A woman in a forensics jacket approached from where she had been examining the ice with thermal imaging equipment. Dr. Amanda Simmons was the senior medical examiner, a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had a reputation for being both brilliant and unflappable, the kind of person who could perform an autopsy while eating lunch and discussing baseball scores. Dr. Simmons, ME's office, she introduced herself to Rivera. Based on preliminary thermal scans, the victim is completely frozen solid within approximately 8 to 10 inches of ice. The surrounding ice is only 4 inches thick, which means this section was built up specifically around the body. We're going to need to melt through carefully to preserve evidence and prevent any damage to the remains. How long are we talking? Rivera pulled out his notebook, already taking notes. 6 to 8 hours minimum, possibly longer if we encounter complications. Simmons gestured to the frozen form above them. This level of preservation suggests the body was placed here during the installation process and frozen gradually as the ice was built up in successive layers. You cannot drop a corpse onto finished ice and achieve this result. It had to be integrated during construction. So someone put a dead body in the middle of an ice rink while they were building it. Rivera's tone carried a mixture of disbelief and dark resignation. In a shopping mall, with security cameras everywhere. That appears to be exactly what happened. Simmons pulled out her own tablet, making notes and taking reference photographs. The good news is that the freezing will have preserved evidence exceptionally well. Biological evidence, trace materials, possibly even fingerprints if we're very lucky. The bad news is that recovering all of that is going to be a slow, painstaking process. Sarah felt Max press against her leg, his solid warmth a constant reminder of how this had all started. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, the familiar gesture calming for both of them. Who had access to this area during construction? Chen, who had been hovering nervously near the stairs, stepped forward reluctantly. The facilities manager looked like he might be sick, his face pale and drawn. Iceworks Entertainment brought their own installation crew. Union workers, all background checked according to the contract. They worked mostly at night, between midnight and 6 a.m., to avoid disrupting mall operations during business hours. 3 weeks of construction total, working 5 nights a week. I need complete personnel records for everyone on that crew, Rivera said, his pen moving rapidly across the notebook page. Names, addresses, background checks, everything. And I want security footage from the entire installation period, every camera, every angle, the complete archive. Walsh, who had been coordinating with his security team to maintain the perimeter, pulled out his phone. I can have IT pull all of that within the hour. Everything runs through our digital system. Every camera in the mall saves to our server farm. 30-day rolling archive. Do it, Rivera turned to Sarah. Walk the perimeter with your dog. See if he picks up anything else. Sarah nodded and led Max back up the stairs and out into the main atrium. The K-9 immediately went to work, nose down, moving in systematic patterns as he processed the complex overlay of scents that filled the space. The mall was a sensory nightmare for a tracking dog, with thousands of people passing through every day, each one leaving microscopic traces of their presence. But Max had been trained to filter through the noise, to isolate specific scent signatures, and follow them even through the most contaminated environments. He worked the area around the service entrance methodically, circling back several times to specific spots before moving on. Sarah followed, watching his body language, reading the subtle shifts in his posture and pace that indicated levels of interest. Max paused near a maintenance closet about 20 yards from the ice rink, his attention focused on the doorframe. Sarah tried the handle and found it locked. She waved over Walsh, who produced a master key and opened the door. Inside was a standard janitor's closet, filled with cleaning supplies, mops, buckets, and a rolling cart. But Max pushed past the cleaning equipment to the back corner, where a stack of cardboard boxes had been stored. He sniffed the boxes intently, then sat and looked back at Sarah with that focused attention that meant he had found something significant. Rivera joined them, peering into the closet. What did he find? I don't know yet. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and carefully moved the boxes aside. Behind them, hidden from casual view, was a plastic garbage bag tied at the top. She opened it carefully and revealed clothing inside. Men's clothing, a jacket, button-down shirt, slacks, all neatly folded. She pulled out the jacket and found a wallet in the inside pocket. Opening it revealed a driver's license, credit cards, and an employee ID for Lenox Square Mall. The ID card showed a photograph of a smiling man in his early 40s, dark hair, friendly eyes. The name read Michael Brennan, Operations Manager. Sarah felt the case shift beneath her feet, the pieces starting to come together in ways that pointed towards something far worse than a random killing. The victim worked here. Rivera took the ID card, studying it with narrowed eyes. Operations Manager, that's a significant position. He would have been involved in vendor relationships, maintenance oversight, probably had access to most areas of the mall. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I need you to run a missing persons check. Michael Brennan, employee of Lenox Square Mall. Yes, I'll wait. While Rivera worked the phone, Sarah continued searching the closet with Max's help. The K-9 was interested in the corner where the clothing had been hidden, his nose working overtime as he processed layers of scent information. Sarah could see scratches on the floor in that corner, recent marks that suggested something heavy had been dragged across the concrete. She photographed them carefully, then used her flashlight to check the walls. There were smudges at about waist height, handprints perhaps, left by someone moving through this space in a hurry or under stress. Rivera ended his call and turned back to Sarah with grim confirmation. Michael Brennan was reported missing 3 weeks ago. His wife filed the report when he failed to come home from work. Last confirmed sighting was here at the mall, late evening, the night before the missing persons report was filed. 3 weeks ago, Sarah repeated, right in the middle of the ice rink installation timeline. Exactly. Rivera was already making more calls, coordinating with the missing persons unit to pull the complete file. I want everything on Brennan. Work history, financial records, personal relationships, any complaints or conflicts in the weeks before he disappeared, and I want to know everyone he interacted with on the night he went missing. The investigation was now operating at full intensity. More detectives arrived, along with additional forensic personnel and uniformed officers, to expand the secure perimeter. The mall management was notified that the central atrium would remain closed indefinitely, which sparked a series of heated phone calls between mall executives and the police department's public affairs office. None of that mattered to Sarah. She continued working with Max, methodically searching every corner of the atrium, documenting everything the K-9 found interesting. They discovered more evidence of recent activity near the service entrance, including fresh boot prints that had been partially obscured by regular foot traffic, but were still visible under careful examination. The boot prints were large, men's size 12 or 13, with a distinctive tread pattern that crime scene photographed extensively. By late afternoon, the ME's team had set up a complete field operation directly over the ice rink, including a tent structure to contain the melting process and prevent contamination. Industrial heaters were positioned carefully, along with a drainage system to capture and preserve the water as the ice melted. The entire operation was being recorded on video from multiple angles, creating a complete documentary record of the recovery process. Sarah stood at the edge of the work area, watching the careful, methodical work of the forensic team. Max sat beside her, his work done for now, content to simply be near his handler. Rivera approached with a tablet, his expression troubled. "I've been going through security footage from the night Brennan disappeared. He arrived at the mall at 11:37 p.m., entered through the executive entrance using his key card. He went directly to the central atrium area where the ice rink installation was underway." "Who else was here?" Sarah asked, though she could already guess the answer. "The Iceworks crew, 4 men, all logged in through the contractor entrance, and 1 more person." Rivera turned the tablet so Sarah could see the screen. The security footage showed a man in his 50s, heavy-set, wearing the kind of business-casual attire typical of mall management. Robert Holloway, Director of Facilities for Lenox Square. He arrived about 20 minutes after Brennan also used his keycard for access. Sarah studied the footage carefully. What was the Director of Facilities doing here at midnight during an installation project? That's an excellent question. Rivera swiped to another video file, showing different camera angles of the same time frame. The interesting part is that Holloway's car is visible in the executive parking area until 4:18 a.m., nearly 5 hours after he arrived. But we never see Brennan leave. His car stayed in the lot until his wife reported him missing the next day. The implications were clear and dark. Sarah looked at the ice rink, where technicians were beginning the careful melting process. Brennan came here that night and never left. Holloway was here for hours, and somehow Brennan ended up frozen in the ice. "I've got people pulling Holloway's complete background right now," Rivera said. "Financial records, work history, personal associations. If he's involved in this, I want to know why." As evening approached and the mall closed for the day, the investigation continued under portable lights. The central atrium was now completely secured, with uniformed officers maintaining a hard perimeter and crime scene tape marking secondary and tertiary zones of investigation. Store employees and managers were interviewed as they left for the day, though most had no useful information beyond confirming that the ice rink installation had been ongoing for weeks and that Michael Brennan had been a well-liked member of the mall's management team. The first break in the ice came around 7 p.m. Dr. Simmons emerged from the tent looking tired but satisfied. She found Rivera and Sarah near the mobile command post that had been set up at the edge of the atrium. "We've made initial contact with the body. Preliminary visual identification confirms this is Michael Brennan. The wallet you found matches the employee ID visible on the corpse. Clothing is consistent. Physical characteristics match the DMV photo. Formal identification will need to come from family, but I'm confident in the preliminary." "Cause of death?" Rivera asked, though the question was somewhat premature given the condition of the body. "Too early to say definitively, but I can see significant bruising around the throat and what appears to be ligature marks. The neck shows clear trauma. Working hypothesis is strangulation, but I'll need to get him back to the morgue for a complete autopsy before I commit to that officially." Simmons pulled off her gloves and disposed of them in a biohazard container. "What I can tell you is that he was dead before being placed in the ice. Lividity patterns and tissue preservation are consistent with that timeline. So he was killed somewhere else, then brought here and frozen into the rink during construction. Sarah said it as a statement, not a question. That's what the evidence suggests. Simmons looked back at the tent, where her team continued the painstaking extraction work. This was planned. Whoever did this knew the ice rink was being installed, knew it would provide an opportunity to dispose of a body in a way that might never be discovered. If the rink had been dismantled and removed as scheduled after the holiday season, the body would have been long gone before anyone thought to look. "Except Max found him," Rivera said, glancing at the K-9 who was resting on a cooling pad near Sarah's feet. 2 weeks into the installation being open to the public, and the dog picks up on something wrong. "Not the first time a K-9 has solved a case that would have otherwise gone cold," Simmons observed. "You should put in for a commendation for him." The extraction process continued through the night. Sarah stayed on site, coordinating with the expanding investigation and keeping Max fresh with regular breaks and water. By midnight, Brennan's body had been fully freed from the ice and prepared for transport to the ME's office. The process had yielded significant evidence, including trace materials frozen in the ice around the body, what appeared to be fiber evidence on the clothing, and biological samples that would be processed for DNA. Every piece of evidence was carefully documented, photographed, and preserved in the chain of custody. Rivera had spent hours reviewing security footage and building a timeline of events from the night Brennan disappeared. He gathered Sarah and several other key detectives near the command post around 1 a.m. to share what he had discovered. "I've been able to track the movements of everyone who was in the mall that night. Michael Brennan arrived at 11:37 p.m. and went directly to the construction area. At 11:53 p.m., Robert Holloway arrived and also went to the construction area. At 12:15 a.m., we see both of them on camera near the service entrance to the ice rink platform. They appear to be having a conversation, though we can't hear audio. At 12:29 a.m., only Holloway is visible, and he appears to be moving something large, wrapped in plastic sheeting into the service area." Sarah leaned closer to the screen, studying the footage carefully. "That's got to be Brennan's body." "I think so too. The timing works, the size and shape are consistent, and the Iceworks crew was taking a break at this time, which we know from their own time logs and additional security footage. Holloway had a window of about 30 minutes when no one else was actively working on the rink." Rivera advanced the footage frame by frame. At 1:47 a.m., we see 3 members of the Iceworks crew return to the work area. One of them, a man named Torres, supervising the crew, goes into the service area where Holloway had been working. They're in there together for approximately 12 minutes. When they come out, they begin the next layer of ice construction over the area where the body was hidden. "So, Torres was complicit," Sarah said. "He helped hide the body in the ice." "It looks that way, and there's more." Rivera pulled up financial records on his tablet. "I've been going through the mall's vendor payments. Iceworks Entertainment has been doing contract work for Lenox Square for 3 years. Various projects, not just the ice rink. In that time, they've been paid approximately $1.7 million. I had our financial crimes unit take a look at the payment records, and they found irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" another detective asked. "Overcharges, inflated labor costs, materials billed at rates well above market value, ghost workers who were paid but never showed up on site. Based on their analysis, Lenox Square has been overcharged by somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 over the 3-year period." Rivera looked around at the assembled detectives. "And guess who was responsible for reviewing and approving all vendor contracts for the mall?" "Michael Brennan," Sarah said, the full picture finally becoming clear. "As operations manager, he would have oversight of all contracts." "Exactly. And according to his work computer, which we're in the process of examining, Brennan had been conducting an audit of vendor relationships in the weeks before his disappearance. He had flagged the Iceworks entertainment contracts specifically. He had scheduled a meeting with Robert Holloway and the mall's executive director to discuss his findings. That meeting was set for the morning after Brennan disappeared. The motive was now clear and ugly. Brennan had discovered fraud and was preparing to expose it. Someone had killed him to prevent that exposure and protect a lucrative criminal enterprise. The question was how many people were involved and how deep the conspiracy went. "Where is Holloway now?" Sarah asked. Rivera's expression was grim. "That's the problem. He called in sick 3 days ago, right after your dog found the body, and we started locking down the scene. He hasn't been seen since. His home is empty, car is gone, phone is off. We've got a bolo out for him and his vehicle, but so far, nothing." "He's running," Sarah said. "He knows we found the body, knows we'll eventually connect him to it." "Probably, but here's the interesting part. Holloway's bank accounts show a large cash withdrawal 2 days ago, $25,000, right at the limit before it triggers automatic federal reporting. His credit cards haven't been used since then. No ATM withdrawals, no purchases. He's trying to stay off the grid." Sarah thought about the timing, about Holloway's movements and the limited window he had before law enforcement closed in completely. He's still in the area. If he was going to run somewhere far away, he would have done it immediately. He's waiting for something, or he's making arrangements. "That's my thinking too," Rivera agreed. "I've got units checking his known associates, family members, anyone who might be helping him. But I want you and Max on this too. If anyone can track this guy down, it's your dog." Over the next 2 days, the investigation expanded in multiple directions. The forensic analysis of Brennan's body confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, with additional evidence suggesting he had been attacked from behind with a ligature of some kind, impossibly electrical cord or rope. Time of death was estimated at approximately 3 weeks prior, consistent with the timeline of his disappearance. The trace evidence recovered from his clothing included fibers that matched materials found in the maintenance areas of Lenox Square Mall, further connecting his death to the location. DNA evidence was being processed, though results would take several more days. The investigation into Robert Holloway revealed a man who had lived beyond his means for years. Bank records showed regular income from his job as director of facilities, but also unexplained cash deposits that totaled more than $200,000 over the past 3 years. The timing of these deposits corresponded closely with payments made to Iceworks Entertainment by the mall. The pattern strongly suggested kickbacks, a scheme where Holloway approved inflated contracts and received a percentage of the overcharges in return. Michael Brennan's audit would have exposed the entire operation and sent Holloway to prison for fraud and embezzlement. Iceworks Entertainment's offices in Jacksonville were raided by federal agents as part of a coordinated operation with the Atlanta police. The company's owner, a man named Victor Ramos, was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. Torres, the crew supervisor who had helped hide Brennan's body, was picked up trying to cross the border into Mexico and was extradited back to Georgia. Both men immediately requested lawyers and refused to cooperate, but the documentary evidence was overwhelming. Email records showed detailed coordination between Holloway, Ramos, and Torres regarding the fraudulent contracts and the inflated payments. Additional emails discovered on Torres's personal laptop discussed what to do about Michael Brennan's audit and the threat it posed to their operation. But Holloway himself remained at large. Every known location had been checked. His family claimed no contact. His friends denied knowing where he was. His credit cards and phone remained inactive. He had effectively vanished, taking his cash and leaving no electronic trail to follow. Sarah and Max worked the case with relentless focus. They revisited every location connected to Holloway, letting Max work each scene for scent evidence and trail patterns. The K-9 was remarkable in his ability to process complex scent environments and identify specific individuals even after days or weeks had passed. At Holloway's home, Max spent hours working through each room, cataloging every scent signature, building a complete olfactory profile of the missing man. Sarah collected clothing from the hamper, shoes from the closet, any personal items that retained Holloway's scent. These would serve as reference samples, allowing Max to identify the target even in completely new environments. They checked hotels, motels, extended stay facilities within a 100-mile radius. They visited the homes of Holloway's known associates, watching for any sign of the fugitive or evidence of recent contact. The work was tedious and often frustrating, but Sarah knew from experience that persistence paid off in investigations like this. Someone always made a mistake. Someone always left a trace. The question was whether they would find that trace before Holloway managed to disappear completely. The break came on the 4th day after Brennan's body was discovered. A patrol unit spotted Holloway's car parked at a budget motel near Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, tucked behind the building in a spot not visible from the street. The officer ran the plates, confirmed the vehicle matched the bolo, and immediately called it in. Within minutes, Sarah and Max were en route, along with Rivera, multiple detectives, and a tactical response team in case Holloway decided to resist arrest. Sarah pulled into the motel parking lot with Max in the back of her K-9 unit, her heart rate elevated, but her hands steady on the wheel. This was what she had trained for, what she and Max had spent 7 years preparing for together. The parking lot was mostly empty in the mid-afternoon, just a few cars scattered across the faded asphalt. Holloway's vehicle was exactly where the patrol officer had reported it, a silver Honda Accord, with a layer of road dust and a parking sticker from Lenox Square Mall still visible in the windshield. Rivera coordinated the approach, positioning uniformed officers at all exits and placing detectives in overwatch positions. The motel was a 2-story structure, probably 40 rooms total, arranged in a U-shape around a cracked swimming pool that looked like it had not been used in years. The manager, a woman in her 60s, with suspicious eyes and a cigarette perpetually balanced on her lower lip, confirmed that a man matching Holloway's description had checked in 3 days ago, paying cash for a week in advance. Room 217, 2nd floor, facing the back of the property. Sarah and Max took up position near the rear stairwell, where they would have a clear line of sight on anyone attempting to flee from the room. Max was alert but calm, picking up on Sarah's controlled tension. The Malinois knew what was coming, could read the signs of an imminent confrontation in the way the humans moved and communicated. Sarah checked her service weapon, verified her radio was functioning, and gave Max a quick pat on the shoulder. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, they would face it together. Rivera moved to the door of room 217 with 2 uniformed officers flanking him. He knocked hard, 3 sharp impacts that echoed across the motel's exterior walkway. "Atlanta Police, Robert Holloway, we have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door now." There was a moment of absolute silence. Sarah could hear her own breathing, the distant hum of traffic from the nearby airport, the rustle of wind through the dead leaves accumulated in the corners of the parking lot. Then the sounds of panic from inside the room, furniture scraping across a floor, a voice cursing, the crash of something breaking. "He's running!" Rivera shouted into his radio. "Watch the rear!" The back window of room 217 exploded outward in a shower of glass. Robert Holloway came through headfirst in a desperate dive, landing hard on the concrete walkway and rolling clumsily to his feet. He was heavier than his employee photo had suggested, out of shape, moving with the panicked energy of a man who knew his options were gone. He spotted Sarah and Max at the base of the stairs and changed direction, heading for the parking lot. and the thin possibility of reaching a vehicle before being caught. He made it perhaps 20 feet before Max closed the distance. Sarah had released the K-9 the moment Holloway emerged from the room, and the Malinois moved with devastating speed and precision. He did not bark, did not waste energy on intimidation. He simply ran Holloway down like prey and drove him face first into the pavement. The impact was hard enough to knock the wind out of Holloway, and before he could recover, Max had his jaws locked around the man's forearm with exactly the amount of pressure needed to immobilize without causing serious injury. It was a perfect apprehension. Textbook K-9 work, executed with the kind of expertise that came from years of training and an almost supernatural understanding between handler and dog. Sarah was on Holloway before he could process what had happened. She pulled his arms behind his back and secured handcuffs while Max released and stepped back. Mission accomplished. Robert Holloway, you're under arrest for the murder of Michael Brennan and multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. She read him his rights while he gasped for breath against the dirty pavement, his face scraped from the impact, his expensive shirt torn and stained. Rivera arrived seconds later, other officers surrounding them to secure the scene and ensure there was no chance of escape or resistance. They found everything in Holloway's motel room. Plane tickets to Ecuador, purchased under a false name but with Holloway's photo. $47,000 in cash, bundled in stacks and hidden in a duffel bag. Multiple fake IDs in various names, all with Holloway's picture. A laptop containing years of incriminating evidence, including the entire financial record of his arrangement with Iceworks Entertainment. But the most damning evidence was Holloway's own notes, saved in encrypted files that took investigators several hours to crack. The notes detailed everything: how he had first contacted Victor Ramos about inflating contract bids, how they had split the proceeds, how Michael Brennan's audit had threatened to destroy everything they had built. The notes also described the night of Brennan's murder with chilling precision. Holloway had lured Brennan to the mall with the promise of discussing the audit findings privately. They had met near the ice rink installation, which was underway with the Iceworks crew working their overnight shift. The conversation had turned into an argument when Holloway attempted to bribe Brennan into looking the other way. Brennan had refused, had threatened to go to both mall management and law enforcement with his findings. Holloway had panicked, grabbed Brennan from behind, and strangled him with an extension cord he had brought specifically for that purpose. The notes described how heavy Brennan's body had been, how difficult it was to move him into the service area beneath the platform, how Torres had helped him position the corpse in the center of the unfinished ice rink. They had worked quickly, laying Brennan flat and building up the next layers of ice around and over him, freezing him into place before anyone could notice. The plan had been perfect. The body would be discovered only when the rink was eventually dismantled, months later, and by then Holloway expected to be long gone, living comfortably in South America on his accumulated fraud proceeds. He had not counted on Max. None of them had. The possibility that a police K-9 would detect something wrong with the ice, that the dog's instincts would penetrate through feet of frozen water to sense human remains beneath, had never entered their calculations. It was the kind of variable that could not be planned for, the unpredictable element that destroyed even the most carefully constructed schemes. The confession came during interrogation after Holloway's attorney arrived and reviewed the evidence. There was no point in denying anything. The documentary evidence was overwhelming, the forensic evidence was conclusive, and Holloway had literally been caught trying to flee the country with cash and fake identification. He described killing Michael Brennan in detail, his voice flat and emotionless, as if he was discussing a business transaction rather than taking a human life. He described working with Torres to hide the body, how they had timed it perfectly when the rest of the installation crew was on break. He even described the satisfaction he had felt watching families skate over Brennan's frozen corpse for 2 weeks, completely unaware of the darkness beneath their blades. The case closed with brutal efficiency. Holloway was charged with first-degree murder, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution. Torres faced similar charges as an accessory to murder and conspiracy. Victor Ramos and his company were charged with fraud and racketeering. The executives at Iceworks Entertainment saw their business collapse as clients across the Southeast cancelled contracts and filed lawsuits. Lenox Square Mall underwent a complete audit of all vendor relationships and implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar fraud in the future. For Sarah and Max, the case was added to their growing list of successful investigations. The department put in for a commendation for Max, recognizing his role in solving a murder that might otherwise have remained hidden indefinitely. The media coverage was intense for several days, with reporters fascinated by the story of a K-9 detecting a body frozen beneath an ice rink in a shopping mall. Sarah declined most interview requests, preferring to let her work speak for itself. She stood in the atrium one final time before the ice rink was dismantled completely. The space was empty now, the holiday decorations removed. The ice long since melted away. Workers were breaking down the platform and removing the refrigeration equipment, returning the central atrium to its usual configuration. It looked smaller without the ice rink, less magical. Sarah could see the exact spot where Max had frozen in place, where his instincts had detected something wrong that no human could have sensed. Max sat beside her, calm and quiet. He did not understand the weight of what he had found, the justice his actions had set in motion. For him, it had been just another day of work, another alert, another moment of doing exactly what he had been trained to do. But Sarah understood. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Good boy, Max. You're such a good boy." Rivera found them there, his coat dusted with the early spring pollen that was already beginning to coat Atlanta. The case had stretched from December into March, consuming 3 months of intensive investigation and preparation for trial. Media's still asking for interviews. The brass wants us at some kind of recognition ceremony next week. "They can have you," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "Max and I have other cases." Rivera chuckled, understanding her perspective completely. "Fair enough, but for what it's worth, Collins, this was outstanding work. Michael Brennan's family finally has answers and justice. His wife, his kids, they know what happened now. They can have closure. That matters more than all the commendations and ceremonies combined." It did matter. Sarah knew that truth in her bones, had built her career on the belief that every victim deserved justice, every family deserved truth. Michael Brennan had been a good man who had refused to be complicit in corruption. His death had been cruel and calculated, designed to hide fraud and protect criminals. But he had not been forgotten, had not remained frozen in darkness. Max had made certain of that. A K-9's instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution and refined by thousands of hours of training, had penetrated through layers of ice and deception to expose the truth. They left the mall together as workers continued dismantling the equipment, their tools echoing through the empty atrium. The spring afternoon was warm and bright, the kind of weather that made Atlanta feel hopeful and alive. Sarah and Max walked to her K-9 unit, the familiar partnership moving in perfect synchronization. There would always be another case, another victim, another moment where Max's extraordinary abilities would mean the difference between justice and oblivion. That was the nature of their work, the bond they had forged through years of shared danger and absolute trust. Sarah thought about the families who had been skating over Michael Brennan's body, unaware of the tragedy beneath their feet. She thought about the cold calculations behind Holloway's crime, the arithmetic of murder disguised as holiday entertainment. But mostly she thought about Max, stopping at the edge of the ice rink with absolute certainty, refusing to walk past something that violated every instinct in his remarkably tuned body. That was the power of a K-9 unit, the capability that went beyond any technology or investigative technique. Max had sensed truth hidden beneath layers of frozen water, had detected human remains through methods that science could measure but never fully explain. Back at the precinct later that evening, Sarah filed her final supplemental report while Max slept under her desk, exhausted from the long day. The station was quiet, most detectives either gone home or out responding to the constant flow of calls that defined police work. Sarah typed methodically, recording the last details of evidence collection and chain of custody procedures. The case file had grown to hundreds of pages, documenting every aspect of the investigation from Max's initial alert to Holloway's eventual conviction. When she finished, she saved the document and leaned back in her chair. Her phone showed multiple messages from colleagues offering congratulations and from journalists still hoping for interviews. She ignored them all, setting the phone aside. Her attention went to Max, sleeping peacefully under the desk. The Malinois' breathing was slow and steady, his body completely relaxed in a way he rarely achieved in the field. She watched him sleep and felt overwhelming gratitude for their partnership. "You saved his family, Max," she said softly, though the dog was too deeply asleep to hear. "You gave them truth when everyone else had given up. That's not nothing. That's everything." The next day brought new cases and new challenges, a missing person report that required Max's tracking abilities, a suspected drug house that needed clearing, a training session with new K-9 handlers learning the fundamentals of K-9 behavior and tactical deployment. Sarah and Max moved through it all with professional competence, their partnership so finely tuned that words were often unnecessary. They communicated through gesture and glance, through subtle shifts in body language that conveyed complex information instantaneously. The recognition ceremony happened 2 weeks later in the main hall of Atlanta Police Headquarters. The mayor attended, along with the chief of police and various department heads. Max received a commendation for exceptional service, along with a new tactical vest and a ceremonial plaque that Sarah would hang in her office alongside Max's other awards. The ceremony was brief and formal, exactly the kind of official recognition that made both Sarah and Max uncomfortable, but that served important institutional purposes. The department needed heroes, needed visible symbols of success and dedication. Max, sitting perfectly at attention beside Sarah throughout the ceremony, provided that symbol effortlessly. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed and officials returned to their various duties, Rivera found Sarah and Max near the exit. "You looked like you wanted to bolt during that whole thing," he observed with amusement. "Max doesn't understand why everyone was staring at him, and I don't like crowds," Sarah admitted, "but it made the brass happy, and that keeps them off our backs for a while." True enough. Rivera handed her a folder. "New case came in this morning. Suspicious death in Buckhead, possible homicide. Scene has some unusual elements. They're requesting K-9 assistance." Sarah took the folder and flipped through the initial report. "When do they need us?" "Soon as you're available." She looked down at Max, who gazed back with alert attention. The ceremony was already forgotten. The accolades and commendations meant nothing to him. All that mattered was the work, the partnership, the next challenge waiting to be faced. "We're available now." They left headquarters together, moving toward the K-9 unit parked in the secured lot. The spring day had turned warm and humid, typical Georgia weather that could shift from pleasant to oppressive within hours. Sarah opened the rear door of the vehicle, and Max jumped in with practiced ease, settling onto his cooling pad. She closed the door, checked her equipment, and climbed into the driver's seat. The new case details displayed on her mobile data terminal, providing addresses and preliminary information. Another victim waiting for justice, another family hoping for answers, another scene where Max's extraordinary abilities might make the crucial difference. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward Buckhead and whatever waited there. Behind her, Max was alert and ready, watching the city pass by through the window. They had been partners for 7 years, had worked hundreds of cases, had faced danger and triumph in equal measure. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged in shared experience and absolute trust. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was the promise they had made, the oath they lived by. Justice for the victims, truth for the families, and the unbreakable partnership between a handler and her K-9. Strengthened by every case, they closed together. The ice rink at Lenox Square Mall would eventually be forgotten by most people, just another holiday installation that came and went with the season. But for Michael Brennan's family, it would always be remembered as the place where truth was finally revealed. And for Sarah and Max, it would be remembered as another case where instinct, training, and partnership combined to expose darkness and deliver justice. That was their purpose, their calling, the reason they continued this work despite the danger and the emotional toll it sometimes demanded. As they drove through Atlanta toward the next investigation, Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror at Max. The K-9 met her eyes, that steady K-9 gaze that conveyed loyalty and readiness. She smiled slightly and returned her attention to the road. The work was never done. There would always be another case, another victim, another family desperate for answers, and there would always be Sarah and Max, ready to respond, ready to serve, ready to find truth where others saw only darkness. The bond between a police officer and her K-9 partner was something special, something that transcended the usual boundaries of human-animal relationships. It was built on mutual trust, shared danger, and countless hours of training and experience. Max was not just a tool or a resource. He was Sarah's partner in the truest sense, an equal member of their team whose contributions were just as vital as her own. Without him, she would still be a competent officer. With him, she was something more, capable of achievements that would be impossible alone. The case of the frozen body at Lenox Square Mall would be taught at the police academy as an example of excellent investigative work and the critical importance of K-9 units in modern law enforcement. Instructors would use it to demonstrate how dogs could detect evidence that humans missed entirely, how their extraordinary senses could penetrate through barriers and deception to find truth. Future K-9 handlers would study the case file and marvel at Max's ability to sense human remains through 8 inches of ice and countless layers of atmospheric interference. But for Sarah and Max, it was simply another case in a career full of them. Another moment where their partnership proved its value. Another family given the gift of closure and justice. They did not need recognition or ceremony to validate their work. The knowledge that they had made a difference, that Michael Brennan's killers had been brought to justice, that his family could finally grieve with understanding, was reward enough. The city stretched out before them as they drove, millions of people living their lives, most of them safe and secure because officers like Sarah and K-9s like Max stood between them and the darkness. It was noble work, important work, the kind of calling that defined a life's purpose. Sarah had never wanted to do anything else, and she knew that Max felt the same in his own way. They were meant for this, perfectly suited to the demands and challenges of law enforcement. As they approached the scene in Buckhead, Sarah prepared herself mentally for whatever awaited. A new investigation, a new victim, new questions that needed answering. Max sensed the shift in her focus and became more alert, his body language changing subtly as he prepared for work. This was their life, the path they had chosen, the partnership that defined them both. And as Sarah parked the K-9 unit and prepared to enter another crime scene with Max at her side, she felt that familiar sense of purpose and readiness. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Always. The weeks following the arrests brought a series of revelations that expanded the scope of the case far beyond a single murder. Federal investigators joined the Atlanta Police Department's inquiry, bringing resources and expertise to unravel what had become a complex financial crimes investigation alongside the homicide prosecution. The fraud scheme involving Iceworks Entertainment and Robert Holloway proved to be just one thread in a larger web of corruption that extended across multiple businesses and municipal contracts. Victor Ramos, facing decades in federal prison, eventually agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed a systematic approach to public corruption that had been operating for nearly a decade, involving not just Lenox Square Mall, but multiple commercial properties and even some government contracts. Torres, the Iceworks supervisor who had helped hide Brennan's body, was less fortunate in his legal strategy. He initially refused to cooperate, believing that his attorney could negotiate a favorable plea deal without requiring his testimony against others. That calculation proved disastrous when forensic evidence definitively placed him at the scene during the critical period when Brennan's body was being concealed in the ice. Security footage showed him entering and exiting the service area with Holloway. Trace evidence recovered from the platform matched materials found on his work clothes. His cell phone records placed him at the mall during the precise time window when the murder occurred. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a first-degree murder charge as an accessory, Torres eventually agreed to plead guilty to manslaughter and conspiracy in exchange for his testimony at Holloway's trial. The investigation into Holloway's financial dealings uncovered a lifestyle that had been funded entirely by corruption. His official salary as director of facilities was comfortable but modest, certainly not enough to support the vacation home in Florida, the luxury car he drove, the country club membership, and the private school tuition for his children. Bank records showed the pattern clearly. Every time a payment went from Lenox Square Mall to Iceworks Entertainment, a corresponding cash deposit would appear in one of Holloway's accounts within days. The amounts were carefully calculated to stay below reporting thresholds, structured to avoid automatic scrutiny from financial regulators, but the pattern was unmistakable once investigators knew to look for it. Holloway had been stealing from his employer for years, using his position to approve fraudulent contracts and pocketing a percentage of the inflated charges. What made the scheme particularly insidious was how difficult it had been to detect. Holloway had been careful to spread the fraud across multiple vendors and many small transactions rather than a few large ones. Iceworks Entertainment was not the only company involved. Investigators eventually identified 6 different contractors who had paid kickbacks to Holloway in exchange for favorable treatment on bids and contracts. The total amount stolen exceeded $800,000 over the course of his employment. Without Michael Brennan's careful audit and attention to detail, the scheme might have continued indefinitely. Holloway had been planning to retire in another 5 years, collect his pension, and live comfortably on his accumulated illegal proceeds. Brennan's integrity had destroyed that plan and cost him his life. The trial, when it finally began nearly 8 months after Max's discovery of the body, was a major media event in Atlanta. The combination of murder, corruption, and the dramatic circumstances of the body's discovery made it irresistible to local and national news outlets. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters jockeyed for position. Legal analysts provided endless commentary on every development. Sarah was required to testify about the investigation, describing in detail how Max had alerted on the ice rink and how that alert had led to the discovery of Brennan's body. She walked the jury through the methodical process of clearing the rink, accessing the platform chamber, and finally, seeing the frozen corpse through the viewing panel. Her testimony was calm and professional, sticking strictly to the facts and avoiding any speculation or editorial comment. Max, of course, could not testify, but video footage of him alerting on the ice was played for the jury multiple times. The images were powerful and undeniable. The K-9 frozen at the barrier, every line of his body screaming attention. Sarah crouching beside him, recognizing the significance of his behavior. The decision to clear the rink and investigate further. The footage made it clear that without Max, Brennan's body might have remained hidden for months or even years. The defense attempted to argue that the dog's alert was meaningless, that it proved nothing about when or how Brennan died or who was responsible. But the prosecution connected Max's discovery to the extensive forensic and documentary evidence that pointed conclusively at Holloway. The dog had found the body. The evidence proved who put it there and why. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Jennifer Brennan took the stand. She described her husband's dedication to his work and his growing concern about what he had discovered. She recounted their final conversation, how Michael had told her he was meeting with Robert Holloway to discuss the audit findings and expected to resolve the matter quickly. She described waiting up for him that night, watching the clock as hours passed with no word. The terror that had built as dawn approached, and he still had not come home. The confusion and fear during the 3 weeks he was missing. The devastating moment when police arrived to tell her they had found his body frozen beneath an ice rink at his workplace. She broke down on the stand, her grief raw and overwhelming even months after the discovery. Several jurors were visibly moved, and even the judge had to take a brief recess to allow the courtroom to compose itself. Holloway's defense was essentially non-existent. His attorneys argued that he had panicked, that Brennan's death was not premeditated murder, but rather a spontaneous act committed in the heat of argument. They pointed to the lack of any prior violent history, portrayed Holloway as a family man who had made terrible mistakes but did not deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. The emails discussing what to do about Brennan's audit, the financial records showing systematic fraud, the security footage placing Holloway at the scene, Torres's testimony describing how Holloway had arrived at the mall with a plan already formed, the ligature used to kill Brennan, which Holloway had brought with him to the meeting. All of it pointed to premeditation and careful planning. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was calculated murder designed to protect a lucrative criminal enterprise. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with decades of experience on the bench, showed no mercy during sentencing. She described Holloway's crimes as a profound betrayal of public trust and noted that he had murdered a good man whose only crime was doing his job with integrity. She sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences for the fraud charges. Holloway stood silently as the sentence was read, his face expressionless, though Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly. Whatever life he had envisioned for himself, whatever comfortable retirement he had planned, was gone forever. He would die in prison, remembered only as a corrupt official who had killed to protect his scheme. Torres received 15 years as part of his plea agreement, which many observers felt was too lenient given his role in concealing Brennan's body. But prosecutors had needed his testimony to secure Holloway's conviction, and the cooperation agreement had been necessary to guarantee that testimony. Ramos faced federal charges separately and would likely spend the next decade in prison for his role in the fraud conspiracy. The other contractors who had paid kickbacks to Holloway faced their own prosecutions. though most were able to negotiate plea deals involving restitution, fines and probation rather than significant prison time. Lenox Square Mall underwent a complete restructuring of its vendor management and financial oversight procedures. The mall's parent company fired several executives who had failed to detect the fraud earlier and brought in new leadership with a mandate to implement stronger controls. The ice rink was never rebuilt. The central atrium returned to its traditional configuration, and the space where families had unknowingly skated over Michael Brennan's frozen body became just another section of polished floor where shoppers walked without awareness of the tragedy that had occurred there. For Sarah and Max, life returned to its usual rhythm of calls, investigations, and constant readiness. The Brennan case became another entry in their record, another successful conclusion to add to the hundreds they had already achieved together. The commendation for Max joined others on Sarah's office wall, a wall that was rapidly running out of space for additional awards and certificates. But neither Sarah nor Max worked for recognition. They worked because it was their calling, their purpose, the thing they were meant to do with their lives. The bond between them continued to deepen as months passed and became years. By the time Max turned 8, then 9, Sarah found herself thinking more often about the inevitable end that waited somewhere in the future. K-9s rarely worked past 10 years old, their bodies worn down by the physical demands of the job and the natural aging process that affected all dogs. Max still moved with confidence and power, still alerted with perfect precision, still worked with the enthusiasm of a dog half his age. But Sarah knew he would not be her partner forever. Eventually, retirement would come, and after that, the final farewell that every handler dreaded. She tried not to dwell on it, to focus instead on the present moment, on the cases they still had to solve and the work they still had to do. But the awareness was always there, a shadow at the edge of her consciousness. She thought about Michael Brennan often in the months after the trial concluded, thought about the moment when Max had frozen at the ice rink, refusing to move past a spot where something was profoundly wrong. Without that moment, Brennan's family would still be living in uncertainty, wondering what had happened to their husband and father. Jennifer Brennan had written to Sarah after the trial, a long letter expressing gratitude for the investigation that had brought her family closure. She wrote about how important it was to know the truth, to be able to properly grieve and eventually move forward. She wrote about her husband's character, his dedication to doing what was right, even when it was difficult. She wrote about how much it meant to her that his killers had been brought to justice. Sarah kept that letter in her desk drawer, taking it out occasionally to read when she needed a reminder of why the work mattered. The work always mattered. Every case, every victim, every family deserving truth and justice. That was the foundation of everything Sarah and Max did together. That was the promise they kept every time they responded to a call, every time they worked a scene, every time Max's instincts led them to evidence that would have otherwise remained hidden. The partnership between a police officer and a K-9 was something special, something that transcended normal working relationships. It was built on absolute trust, on understanding that went beyond words, on a shared commitment to a purpose larger than either of them individually. As Sarah sat in her office late one evening, reviewing case files and preparing for the next day's operations, Max slept peacefully under her desk. The precinct was quiet at this hour, most personnel either out on patrol or gone for the day. Sarah could hear the distant sounds of radio traffic, footsteps in the hallway, the constant background noise of a police station that never truly slept. But in her office, there was peace. The partnership that defined her life was resting beside her, ready to wake at a moment's notice if needed, ready to face whatever challenges came next. The Brennan case had shown once again what was possible when training, instinct, and dedication came together. Max had done what no human could have done, had detected truth through barriers that should have been impenetrable. He had given a family answers when all hope seemed lost. He had ensured that justice was served and that a corrupt scheme was exposed and dismantled. That was the power of a K-9 unit, the capability that made them indispensable to modern law enforcement. Sarah closed the case file she had been reviewing and looked down at Max. The Malinois was deeply asleep, his breathing slow and steady, lost in whatever dreams occupied a working dog's unconscious mind. She smiled slightly, feeling that familiar surge of affection and gratitude that came whenever she took a moment to truly appreciate her partner. "We did good, Max," she whispered. "We always do good." Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new moments where their partnership would be tested and proven once again. But tonight, in the quiet of the precinct, Sarah allowed herself to simply be grateful. Grateful for Max, for their years together, for every case they had solved and every family they had helped. The work of a police K-9 unit was demanding and often dangerous, but it was also profoundly meaningful. They made a difference. They brought light to dark places. They gave hope to people who had lost it, and they did it all together, handler and K-9, working as one. The seasons continued their cycle as Sarah and Max maintained their partnership through countless investigations and operations. Spring gave way to summer, and Atlanta's heat became oppressive, the kind of humid warmth that made working in tactical gear almost unbearable. But the work continued regardless of weather or comfort. Crime did not pause for climate, and neither did the K-9 unit. They responded to calls in the blazing afternoon sun and the cool pre-dawn darkness, in downpours that turned streets to rivers, and on clear nights when the city lights made the sky glow orange. Through all of it, Max performed with unwavering reliability, his training and instincts as sharp at 9 years old as they had been in his prime. The Brennan case had changed something subtle in how Sarah approached her work. She had always taken her responsibilities seriously, had always given her full effort to every investigation. But the ice rink case had reinforced the fundamental importance of trusting Max completely, of following his instincts even when logic suggested otherwise. She had seen him alert on thousands of occasions, but that moment at the ice rink stood out. The absolute certainty in his posture, the way he had locked in place and refused to move past something that should not exist. She thought about how easily she might have dismissed his behavior, might have convinced herself he was reacting to something innocuous. But she had trusted him, and that trust had led to justice for Michael Brennan and his family. Sarah made it a point to share the lessons of the case with younger K-9 handlers during training sessions. She described Max's alert, the investigation that followed, the eventual discovery of the body, and the resolution of the case. She emphasized the importance of knowing your K-9 so completely that you could read every nuance of their behavior, could distinguish between casual interest and serious alert. Many handlers nodded in understanding, recognizing the truth in what she was saying. The bond between handler and K-9 was the foundation of everything. Without that bond, a dog was just a well-trained animal. With it, the partnership became something extraordinary, capable of achievements that seemed almost miraculous to outside observers. The department continued to recognize Max's contributions with awards and commendations that accumulated steadily. Sarah's office wall had long since run out of space, forcing her to start rotating which certificates and plaques were actually displayed. But the recognition, while appreciated, was never the point. The point was the work itself, the knowledge that they were making a tangible difference in people's lives. Every case they solved was a family given closure, a criminal brought to justice, a piece of truth excavated from darkness. That was what mattered, not the ceremonies or the media attention. As Max approached his 10th birthday, Sarah began having quiet conversations with the K-9 unit coordinator about retirement planning. Dogs rarely worked past 10, their bodies simply unable to maintain the physical demands of police work as age took its inevitable toll. Max was still capable, still eager, but Sarah could see small changes. He was slower to rise in the morning, his joints stiff until he had been moving for a while. He tired more easily after long operations, needing more recovery time between intense activities. The veterinarian who examined him regularly reported that these were normal signs of aging, nothing alarming, but they were signs nonetheless. The day was coming, sooner than Sarah wanted to accept, when Max would need to retire and live out his remaining years in the peace and comfort he had earned. The thought of working without Max was difficult to process. 7 years of partnership had created a bond deeper than any Sarah had experienced with another living being. Max was not just her working partner. He was her constant companion, her protection, her friend. The idea of showing up to work without him, of facing dangerous situations with a different K-9 or no K-9 at all, felt wrong at a fundamental level. She knew intellectually that she would eventually be paired with another dog, that the work would continue regardless of individual partnerships. But emotionally, the transition felt impossible to imagine. She was not alone in these feelings. Every experienced K-9 handler went through the same process, confronting the reality that their partners aged faster than humans and that the time together was always too short. The department provided support resources, counseling services for handlers dealing with the retirement or loss of their K-9s, but Sarah had not yet taken advantage of them. She was not ready to acknowledge that Max's career was ending, even though the evidence was increasingly clear. On a warm autumn evening, nearly a year after the conclusion of the Brennan trial, Sarah found herself back at Lenox Square Mall for an unrelated call. A theft investigation that required K-9 assistance in tracking a suspect who had fled through the parking structure. Max performed flawlessly, following the scent trail through hundreds of cars and thousands of overlapping human scent signatures, eventually leading them to a suspect hiding behind a dumpster 3 blocks from the mall. The arrest was routine, the kind of operation they had executed countless times before. But as they walked back through the mall to return to their vehicle, Sarah found herself pausing near the central atrium. The space looked completely normal now, almost 2 years after the ice rink had been dismantled. Shoppers moved through the area without awareness of what had happened there, without knowing that a man had been murdered and hidden beneath layers of ice while families skated overhead. The holiday decorations were up again, different from the previous year, but serving the same purpose of encouraging spending and creating seasonal atmosphere. There was no memorial for Michael Brennan, no marker indicating that a life had ended here, and justice had been served. The mall had moved on, as commercial spaces always did, treating tragedy as a temporary disruption to business rather than anything with lasting significance. Max sat beside Sarah, calm and attentive, watching the flow of people with that same alertness he had shown when he first detected something wrong at this spot. Sarah wondered if he remembered. Did K-9s have that kind of long-term memory for specific events? Could Max recall the day he had stopped at the ice rink barrier and refused to move? The instinct that had driven him to alert on human remains hidden beneath frozen water? Or was each day simply the present moment for him, with the past fading quickly into the general background of experience? She would never know the answer to those questions. Max's inner life remained mysterious despite their years together. She could read his body language, could anticipate his reactions, could communicate with him effectively through training and routine. But she could not truly know what he thought or felt, could not access the alien landscape of K-9 consciousness. That mystery was part of what made the partnership so profound. They were 2 different species, evolved along separate paths for millions of years, brought together by human ingenuity and mutual need. The fact that they could work together so effectively, could trust each other so completely, was remarkable when considered objectively. "Come on, partner," Sarah said softly, her hand resting on Max's shoulder. "Let's go home." They walked back through the mall to their vehicle, leaving the atrium and its hidden history behind. The work continued, as it always did. New cases waited. New families needed their help. New criminals needed to be found and brought to justice. The cycle was endless, the demand for their services constant. But Sarah and Max were ready, as they had been ready every day for 7 years. The partnership endured, tested and proven through countless operations, strengthened by shared danger and absolute trust. As she drove back toward the precinct through Atlanta's evening traffic, Max resting peacefully in the back of the K-9 unit, Sarah thought about Michael Brennan one more time. Thought about the moment everything had changed, when Max's instincts had detected something impossible and set events in motion that eventually brought a killer to justice. That was their legacy, she realized. Not the awards or the media coverage or the official recognition. Their legacy was the families they had helped, the truth they had uncovered, the justice they had delivered. Michael Brennan's family could grieve and move forward because of what Max had sensed that day at the ice rink. That was what mattered. That was everything. The city lights were coming on as darkness fell, transforming Atlanta into a constellation of illumination against the deepening sky. Sarah drove through it with the easy competence of someone who had navigated these streets thousands of times. Behind her, Max shifted slightly in his sleep, dreaming whatever dreams occupied a K-9's unconscious mind. The partnership would not last forever. Max's retirement was approaching, inevitable and undeniable. But for now, in this moment, they were still together, still working, still making a difference. And that was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything they had trained for, everything they had worked toward, everything that made the difficult and dangerous work worthwhile. They were partners, Handler and K-9, bound by loyalty and purpose, and 7 years of shared experience. Nothing could diminish that bond. Nothing could erase what they had accomplished together. And when Max's time to retire finally came, Sarah would face it knowing that their partnership had been extraordinary, that they had saved lives and brought justice and made their corner of the world a little bit safer. That was the promise they had kept, the oath they had fulfilled, and in the end, that was all that mattered.